at the door here probably
Okay.
before long. Too bad.
And we are live.
Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. Soyez bienvenus. We are so pleased to welcome Cara Black back to the Poison Pen, albeit virtually, damn it. But we have plans maybe to improve her appearance schedule here later this year. So very exciting. This is Murder at the Porte de Versailles, and it is the 20th. Lord, how can I just hardly believe that? The 20th Aimee LeDuc. So a toast to you, Cher.
Cheers.
Santé.
Santé.
It's always kind of a nice landmark to, to hit a round number like that. 1999, Murder in the Marais, which was a wonderful book and drew very much upon the story of Paris and its Jews during the war in its most heavily populated Jewish arrondissement. The record of the French during the war is not all about the brave resistance fighters and all the help that they did. There were some pretty awful things that happened in France. So Cara has, I think, done a great job taking us through both the goods and the bads of French history. We've encountered any number of situations, but when was Murder in the Marais set, Cara? I know it published in 99, but what year was the story?
1993.
Okay. And now, this being the 20th book, we are in 2001 in what, November? So not far from 9/11 when everyone is super jittery. And the terrorist alerts are very high. So probably we should start, Cara, by your giving us just a little kind of a synopsis, whatever you want to call it, and then, so people know what we're talking about.
Okay, well, thank you, Barbara, and thank you for being with me virtually on my sort of soft launch here, and it's wonderful. Thank you. And Patrick and everyone, and my editor, Juliet, said, hi, say hi to Barbara. And so, yeah, this is set in November of 2001. This is right after 9/11. And the little known fact is that 10 days after 9/11 here in America, there was a bombing in Toulouse, an explosion. And Toulouse down south is like the NASA, it's the head of the aerospace industry. So I really, when I started researching, I really wanted to play with that. Was there a link? How did that happen? And that's sort of the subtext. But we meet Aimee LeDuc at Père Lachaise Cemetery, the famous cemetery, on the anniversary of her father's death. And with her little daughter, Chloe, who's now 3 years old. She's very proud. She can go 3. And and it's kind of a bittersweet time for Aimee. But it's also, she has to get back to the apartment because it's Chloe's birthday party. And so it's kind of a warm time for her because she's thinking, she doesn't really have family, but she does, it's all the people in her world. And they're all there. Morbier, her godfather, who's a commissaire, Renee Friant, her partner, the biological father of Chloe, Boris and Michou, who are very good friends who babysit constantly. Well, in the middle of opening presents, Boris, mon Dieu, realizes he's forgot Chloe's present on his desk at the police lab. And he jumps in a taxi, rushes back, and when Boris does not reappear and there's a bomb explosion, his body is found in the rubble and there is traces of plastique explosives under his fingernail. So he is a suspect. And Aimee is determined to, she said, this can't be, Boris would never do that. And so she's determined to prove his innocence as he's fighting for his life because he's injured. And the police don't believe her. They're antagonistic. Even his lab partners will not help. Every witness she talks to, they give conflicting information. And she's constantly going through all this. And at the same time, Melak, who is the biological father of Chloe, is pressuring her to give up Paris, to leave, to come with him and live on the farm in Brittany. And Aimee is like, can she leave Paris, and live in Brittany? So that's sort of in a nutshell of what's going on. And a lot of the themes are family, the responsibility of witnessing, witnesses, people who witnessed something, a crime. And a lot of times they're very, they're people, it could be you or I, we've seen something and we're afraid to give witness because why? Maybe we weren't supposed to be there. Maybe we were in the wrong place at the wrong time. We were doing something else. We cannot be caught. We have ulterior motives. So I really wanted to explore that. The police said, everybody lies. They lie all the time when they talk to us. And I think we've seen a lot, especially with the George Floyd incidents, someone who bears witness to what goes on to a crime puts themselves at risk as well. So I wanted to explore all those themes. And I wanted to talk about this part of Paris, the 15th arrondissement, which is, there's no monuments there. You've probably gone through it, but it's not where you necessarily go. And I really wanted to find out what was the core of the arrondissement. I ended up falling in love with it because it's very residential. And guess who lives there? Marie Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, lives there. Francois Hollande, the former president. It's where people live and they want to stay off the grid. It's very quiet. They have their families. They have good schools. They like the cheese shop and they're just, always going to go to that cheese shop. And there's a real sense of community if you kind of dig down. And I love that. I felt my favorite market, street market, every weekly market is there. And I always go back, even if I have to cross town, I will go to that market and to that vendor. So, and there's a rich history there. George Brassens, the famous, folk guitarist, he lived there. It was very much a working class area. There was the abattoir, where they slaughtered animals, horses. And, there was the Citroën plant where they made cars and they tore all that down. And they would have working class people, and another sort of tidal wave of immigrants were Iranians. And there's an area called Téhéran-sur-Seine, Tehran on the Seine, which is full of Iranians who are very cosmopolitan, very educated, lived in France. Then there's the ones who fled with the Shah, who fled after, who fled the Ayatollah. And there's a lot of undercurrents. And so I got to explore all that. This area, actually the arrondissement was full of riches. It was hard to pick one. But my friend who lives across from the police lab in the 15th and Rue Danzig said, what I can tell you is that when I was a little boy, I remember I fell out of bed in the middle of the night and I woke up and a bomb had exploded across the street, outside my window at the police lab. And this was a real thing, this really happened. And in the morning, his parents told him what happened. And of course, it was, they didn't get alarmed because bombings happen so often. It was the Basque separatists who put bombs in public buildings, not to hurt anyone. They're very proud. It was a political statement. So he said, yeah, it was just a political statement. And I was like, okay. But then there was a bombing at the Interpol when Interpol used to be in Paris, just outside of Paris in Boulogne. And a policeman said, yeah, you should talk to my friend. He was working at Interpol then. So he called me from Algeria. I don't know what he was doing there, and told me about this bombing and, how the links were possibly to radicals. So anyway, that's a long answer to your question, but there's so many threads there, and it's such a, interesting history, social history of what went on and what goes on all the time.
So this would be a good moment for me, because I forgot in the introduction to say that Cara is very kindly awaiting our books, and she'll be sending them to us. The book, this is February 28th. The book, for production reasons, has been postponed till the middle of March. So Cara doesn't quite have them yet, but we will have ours well before then. But the other thing that I didn't know, but now Cara will show you, is this, she's going to include in our copies this very cool map. Tell us about the map.
Well, I've written 20 books in the 20 arrondissements, but I goofed because I put 2 books in one arrondissement. So I have to write 21 books to cover actually each arrondissement. But yes, the books are all set. I know it looks really small. Murder in the Marais, Murder in Belleville, Murder on the Quai, so they're all set in the different arrondissements, set at different times, of course. Murder in the Marais was 1993. We have like 1981, I believe, is Murder on the Quai, when Aimee LeDuc, or maybe it's a bit later, Aimee LeDuc gets started, her origin story. So yeah, we've got a book in every quartier, and people say, which one should I read? Do I have to start at the beginning? And I always say, you can, of course. Or where do you like to stay? Saint-Germain-des-Prés? I kill people there. Okay, what about the Latin Quarter? We have murder, we've got murders, we've got crime, we've got fashion. It's all there for you. So it's really, it's nothing I ever planned on doing, but
here you are. So let's say that each book is a complete mystery unto itself. There's an investigation in each book that, starts and ends. But there are personal things that happen to Aimee. For example, we've mentioned the baby Chloe, who does not exist in the early books. And she has parents who have complicated histories. Her godfather, Morbius, what's his name?
Morbier, like the cheese.
Morbier, thank you. Morbier, there's a complicated history. And there, Cara's written about the Basque separatists. She's now dealing with the Iranians. Paris, like any other major city, particularly a capital city, is full of ethnic or cultural neighborhoods. It's like Koreatown in Los Angeles or Chinatown in New York or whatever. And Paris, France was a colonial empire. So, there are Algerians and people from Southeast Asia and so forth. But it's also such a magnetic place that Russians went there after the Russian Revolution, the Iranians and so forth. There are an awful lot of expatriates who live in Paris. And of course, in the war, there was all kinds of stuff that went on, people coming and going, tons of art, tons of fashion, lots of reasons for people to hang out in Paris. And it's surprising that they all sort of rub along. Although there've been a lot of, yellow jacket protests of one sort or another. So it's always been a fairly tumultuous city, hasn't it?
Yeah. But what's so great is that ever since I've been going to Paris, there's still people within living memory, who've lived through a lot of this. When I was researching Murder Below Montparnasse, we were talking about the Russians, about where Modigliani, his studio, was there. It was, nobody knew, it was like in this building. Someone had taken it over, but it really had it where he lived before he died, of tuberculosis. And it's amazing that a lot of that is left, and the art academy below it. So there's still those things that we can find, those stories. I hate to say this, but Emily in Paris, right? Where Emily lives is the square where Modigliani's lover, Jean Aubertin, who was also an artist and pregnant with his child, jumped from her family home from the roof right down there in front of Emily's place. I didn't know that until I was watching that show.
Wow.
But of course, Emily doesn't deal with those kind of issues. But everywhere there's some kind of history in Paris. And, we've often talked about that, when I've been to visit you, that there is, the colonial legacy is very much there.
Well, Paris is interesting. It survived all kinds of, the biggest changes to Paris actually happened not in war or not through fire, but Baron Haussmann's remit from what was Napoleon III, right? Louis Napoleon, to remove parts of the medieval city and lay it out with the grand avenues and so forth that we know. the Blitz took out the East End of London and allowed London to rebuild itself. That was flattened in wartime. Hamburg, Germany is another city that was pretty much leveled during World War II. Paris was not. I mean, despite the occupation and all the rest of it, the Germans did not destroy Paris on their way out. There are a lot of stories written about that, about the German commander who was actually, I think, under orders, right, to destroy Paris, but decided not to. So the biggest changes to Paris actually happened strangely in peacetime. And the city that we know right now is not the medieval city that, really existed up until 1870, something like that, when Haussmann got going, or maybe it was in the 1860s. Yeah,
and they incorporated Montmartre and Belleville. They were villages outside of Paris. Yeah.
And like London, there were villages, and metropolitan London. At one point, it was just the city of London, and then gradually these villages. The same thing going on in Los Angeles, or even here in Phoenix. Gradually, the core city kind of envelops these outlying villages, and then they become part of the metro area, and then it keeps spreading. So the Paris of today is a much, much larger urban area than it would have been, in the past. And there's a river that runs through it, just like London, which is very cool. So tons of history with the Seine running all the way up to the English Channel. And, I think that cities that have got major rivers as roads have always had many village, immigrants, many communities and so forth, because of the river. It encourages people.
And the 15th arrondissement borders the Seine. The 15th is, as I said, you don't think about it, but it's this population is the size of Bordeaux. And part of it, it's big. It's residential. And it's next to the 7th. So you can stand at the edge of the 15th and there's the Eiffel Tower glittering, so it's kind of chic where the 15th borders the 7th, which is very snooty. But so you've got these nice kind of glammy, sophisticated chic places, chic addresses. And then you've got these pockets. And I found so many of them, and I just had to set scenes there because they're so wonderful, of these little lanes, with 2-story houses, workers' houses, because there was an auto plant, and there was manufacturing. So, and then there was the butchers, all the butchers that had to live there to, butcher the horses, and the rail tracks, the petit ceinture, the belt of the railroad belt that went around. And so it's interesting because you've got these pockets of wonderful workers' housing, which are very, of course, expensive now. And then you have, this a little bit of Haussmannian, and then you have this ethnic area, if you can say so, with, the Iranian section where there's Iranian shops and restaurants, and there's very much a whole community. And what I discovered, because a woman in my book group who's from Iran was telling me, you've got to talk to my cousin in Paris and go to Tehran-sur-Seine. And it was wonderful because her cousin spoke perfect French. Her cousin had come over, in the 70s and 80s, and in the 70s, before the Shah was deposed. They were wealthy people, sophisticated. They took their money out, they bought apartments, they sent their children to the Sorbonne. Or then you have the other ones who came leaving with the Shah, also that upper class. And then you have the Revolutionary Guard. And I did not know how the tentacles of the Iranian intelligence, spread to France, through Europe, until a policeman said, that really happened. And I know about this. And they are using Palestinian proxy Palestinian proxy assassins. Yes. And so there was, they would go to Paris, so they would leave no trace. They wouldn't be, traced. And actually, they did find one guy who was, not smart, but he killed the Iranian secretary in exile. So there was all this history I had no idea about. I take the cops to dinner, and I say, well, what if? And then I keep going, what if? And I keep pushing, I get answers, and they're going, well, yeah, or no, we'd never do that, or this is what would happen. And I'm going, really? And they'll say, yeah, it's not like that. It would happen like this. And I'm like, okay, and I went to the laboratory, the police laboratory that is one of both of them, all of them. There's two of them there. And it was amazing. I said, I want to, think about doing this. And they're saying, well, what do you want to happen? When is this? What is the weather like? What is this? What time of, the year is it? And I'm telling them, saying, okay, well, it would be like this. And I got a tour. I became friends with the woman who runs the lab. Actually, it was like there were only two men working there. It was really great to see so many women who were scientists and lab technicians. There was like two men. It was great. Anyway, she ran it. She took me on a tour. She showed me where they take the samples when this happens. She showed me working cases. She took my DNA, in case I would commit a crime in France, I would be covered. And then she said, I've got you. I know you now. And then she took me into this area that's a tunnel between the two buildings underground. But as we were passing by, they need to keep the samples frozen, right? In a refrigerated unit, the samples. They take samples. They don't do fingerprints unless it's a bloody fingerprint, but it's blood, semen, and, explosives, any kind of chemical traces, biological and chemical. And the freezer was on the blink. And I was like, whoa. And she goes, oh yeah, we had to rent some and we put them in the parking lot, to move the specimens that are taken to court, used in a case by police. And they were in these, makeshift rented Frigidaire units. And if you've read the book, you know what happens. I won't say any more. I can't give anything away, but it's kind of interesting that when you're going through a national police lab and seeing the way it works and seeing how it's, they're very efficient. They're very good. I mean, I couldn't believe it. And they help so many cases get solved. But to see the kind of conditions and equipment they have was kind of surprising.
Well, you underlining, Rob and I, my husband and I have talked about this a lot. We are also dependent now on electricity. That almost nothing in the world works anymore if there's an interrupted flow of electricity. And with the weird climate stuff going on and people constantly losing power, refrigeration is a major casualty of something like that. We put a generator in. I sat here and looked at the California wildfires last year and realized that if you lost power in Phoenix for a few days in July, you would not only be uncomfortable, but you could lose many things in your house. Your pets could die if you weren't taking care of them and so forth. So we did put in a generator, but that won't protect us against, complete disruption or lack of natural gas or whatever. So we've all moved so far away from living with nature and dependent upon all this stuff that it makes us surprisingly fragile. And I thought that was something that your book brought out. So, here's poor Boris caught in the explosion and in classic crime fiction fashion, can't speak for himself. He can't testify what happened because there he is, blitzed out in the hospital. And so an investigation has to go on around him without his participation, which I find, a really interesting story structure.
Thank you. Yeah, he can't, he might die. So, I mean, he's really
Right.
in desperate need. Yeah. And of course, Aimee feels compunction. I mean, he went to get her daughter's birthday present, and she believes that with every part of her. Of course, everything starts happening to make her doubt that. But then when she's approached, by the Secret Service, the French Secret Service, to investigate for, these radicals and the Iranians, she realizes that she can do that and get information on Boris, which they don't share with her. So she tries to use it both ways. Meanwhile, the biological father of Chloe is like, that's great. You can come and live in the farm in Brittany. You can work remotely. I mean, this was, I didn't mean this to come from the pandemic, but yeah, you can work from home because they're doing all this, IT stuff up in Brittany. You can branch out. And she's like, ooh. So she also has a dilemma as a mother. Is she being selfish? how wonderful for her daughter to live on a farm, to be by the sea. There's horses, there's goats, there's food growing. Isn't that selfish, not to have her daughter, benefit from that? But then, she was born in Paris and she'll die in Paris. I mean, she's not a person who, she wants to have a cafe at the corner. That's kind of her, doesn't have to cross the field to get to a cafe.
Shared custody is probably going to be the solution here. But you know what? It occurs to me, for anybody who's never read one of your books, we haven't actually defined what it is that Aimee does. She's not a cop.
No, she's a private investigator. She took over her father's detective agency, LeDuc Detective, which he took over from his father. So her grandfather started it. He had been a policeman, left the force, the Sûreté, started it. Then his son, Aimee's father, worked as a policeman, was drummed out of the force on trumped up charges with corruption, and went to join his father, and loved being a PI because he didn't have to follow all these rules and regulations and deal with the politics of the police. And then when Aimee was supposed to go, she went to medical school pre-med for 1 year. Her father wanted her to be a doctor and whatever. And her grandfather, Claude, who I sort of fell in love with, Claude said, "You follow your heart and you're so good at what you do here." So she becomes a detective, a PI, private eye, when her father dies in this explosion. She can't deal with that because he did a lot of surveillance. Well, no, he did tracing missing persons. She doesn't want to do that. She wants to join the new world, which is computer security. And remember, when 1993, this was hot stuff. We didn't all have computers. There was no Google. It was all new. So this was a cutting edge kind of field, which I knew nothing about. So, but it was fun to find out. So she handles computer security, but she gets pulled into crime. She's a trained and licensed private investigator.
Right. I just didn't want to give an impression that she actually belonged to the police. And as sometimes happens, and in this case it does, her father, there's an old case that, or a case her father worked that becomes relevant to what's going on. Both her parents have complicated histories. And so those keep coming up with Aimee. I mean, she's not a person who's going to lead a normal life. She's not going to marry and settle down and have 2 or 3 kids and, live on a farm in Brittany, very likely. Although I think for Chloe, at some point you will have to face what does Aimee do in the middle of an investigation with a really active toddler, and maybe sending her to spend some time with her father in Brittany is a solution to all that. So not a bad thing.
Right. And, my editor, Juliet, said that when she was editing this story during the pandemic, she said it was so comforting to her to be back with Aimee LeDuc in her world, and to see this spunky woman, this woman who's tough and, of course, has vulnerable points, but to get out there and kick, what, and, wear a leather catsuit and climb on a roof, and look good while you're doing it, but, take no prisoners. And, it's really fun to get away from all that. And I love writing that. I am not the woman who's going to wear a leather catsuit and go on the roof. I would love to, but not me. But in heels, right? No, she wears her red high tops for roof work. But, I love that kind of character. And sure, she's a bit larger than life, but she has issues and problems and a toddler and this man who's bothering her and this growing attraction to another man. And that's a big problem right there. Can be problematic. So she's and she's also dealing with this legacy of all the police who knew her father, who are constantly throwing things at her. I'm not my father and I vindicated him, but they have a long memory. She's always facing the kind of boys club of the police when, they have each other's back. There's the code of the blue code, the code of honor. You have your partner's back. And fair enough. I mean, you need that actually. But
so this series is gradually becoming more historical. And that Murder in the Murray, it was set in 1993 and published in 1999, but now we're in 2001, so we're 21 years away. And that's a handy thing if you don't want to have to deal with modern forensics. And a private investigator had a different set of skills and a different modus operandi before the internet age. Nowadays they mostly are doing computer searching and all the rest of it. They weren't necessarily out on the street. It's like Spies, the old spycraft. I've talked to some spy novelists, and historical spy stories are more fun because you can use all the traditional spycraft, the letter in the envelope in the newspaper, or the note in the tree, or whatever. And now it's all cybersecurity and hacking and all the rest of it. It's not that interesting to write about.
No, it's not. And I'm glad, people are still paying in francs. They can smoke in the cafes. It's a little bit, it almost feels innocent. But, do you remember Leighton Gage, the wonderful writer?
Yes.
Soho writer?
Lovely guy.
I remember in Paris, we went to a bistro right by the Gare du Nord, and he brought his son-in-law who worked with the Dutch intelligence agency. And we were having oysters. It was so wonderful. We're having oysters. And Leighton said, Cara, I wanted you to meet my son-in-law because, he does this and he does that. And his son-in-law said, I don't use they had cell phones. I don't use cell phones because they can be traced, hacked, GPS. And I never use the computer to contact people. And I just do brush passes, like the old-fashioned spy novel. You just walk by somebody and slip something in their pocket, or you put a chalk mark on a stone wall, or you have what do you call them, letter boxes, something taped under the bench in a park. And he said that way, people either burn it or eat it or, whatever.
Right.
He said, that's what I use. I don't trust anything electronic, which makes it very...
I think that old-fashioned spying is actually coming back in the sense that nothing, can be fully encrypted or is fully secret at all. I mean, I decided not to do social media. I do Instagram for the bookstore, but beyond that, I don't have any, I just don't want to be in that position. And so I miss stuff, I mean, I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on Twitter. I don't have my own Instagram account now, but it also means that I don't worry about any of the fallout, any of the bad things that go with it. And it's perfectly possible to lead an informed life and connect with people without, in fact, doing any of it. And I certainly think if I were a spy, I'd be much more inclined to, trust a letter or something along those lines. I mean, cell phones are terrible. I mean, they can locate you geographically. They can, read your messages. They can tell. There are so many things that I'm amazed that crooks or people who do things like, for example, go to Washington to storm the Capitol, don't remember to leave their phones home. I mean, because your phone's like a witness all the time that you've got it with you and got it on.
I had some VoucherCon. I remember asking Val McDermott, say, Val, how are you handling, when there was, I guess London had the most cameras,
It does. Yeah. CCTV. Right.
I said, how do you, I don't have to worry about that, Val, but how are you handling it? And it's gotten worse. And she said, well, they're always broken. They wear the hoodie, the angle, the person has studied and gets away from the angle. And we've been seeing, I mean, a lot of books I read, there's always someone going, oh, he was very careful. He didn't look at the camera. He had the hoodie, or he was, all that. And I thought, yeah, you have to actually work to avoid that, avoid discovery.
You do. And, and it gets kind of hackneyed, to be honest. If you have to think up ways to disable cell phones, in order to put people into any kind of, if the battery dies, or, dropped it in the water, or, somebody stole it, or it got left on the car seat, or somebody stomped on it. I mean, there are, all kinds of ways, but you have to be constantly thinking about disabling the phone.
Yeah.
In order to deal with that. And as I say, the role of the PI is not, gumshoe is not really a term that even applies anymore, is it?
Well, again, Aimee is pulling away from the computer. It's more corporate
Right.
computer security, but pulled into this, she would learn through with her father. She would be I mean, when she was little, I mean, her father took, raised her along with Morby. And when he had a stakeout, I mean, she had to be in the back of the car sleeping with a wool blanket. I mean, she grew up with a bunch of French fleeks at the table, on Friday night, poker night, when they're drinking or whatever. So she heard I mean, she knows what that is. And I mean, just kind of maybe in a way absorbing a lot what went on about what cops do, and how they negotiate, how they navigate, because a cop will tell you, and this friend of mine, he's a brigade criminel. He was in the brigade criminel, which is the elite homicide squad in Paris. He left to work on, his mother had Alzheimer's and he wanted to help care for her. He went to work in the computer division and he complained of just what you were saying. All these young people, they're doing all this IT and whatever. And he goes, it didn't work for, he went, but they begged him to come back to homicide. And he goes, I am on the street because I know I have all these other tools, which I can let the younger ones, do all this, but I get out there and I talk to people. And I know I've learned how to talk to people, how you talk to someone how you talk to a man who runs the butcher shop, how you talk to the hooker, how you talk to the priest, how you talk to the mother in the park with the child. How do you do it? Because it's still about people. And he said, I would never let that be out of, not be part of my investigation. Because someone saw something, heard something, smelled something, you know what I mean? It's, even though it may not be the puzzle piece that you're looking for, which they have to painstakingly build, everything. So I think that's really true. I mean, for successful, investigation. And Aimee knows you've got to do that. She learned that through her father, that you've got to get out there and talk to people and say, well, are you sure? Or whatever. And they'll say, oh no, but there was something else. And again, it's, there was a special
Right.
point
So she's sitting around on her motorcycle, boots on the ground, literally boots on the ground. And, various threads. I mean, the main one is Boris, and the lab blowing up, but there are other threads. There's no chance she's ever going to lead a quiet life. I mean, it's almost, there's just not any hope. And Cara does have a tendency to leave us with a little bit of a cliffhanger, book to book. So, we go, wonder what's going to happen. So tell me this, what is the arrondissement that you have left out? You say you're going to have to write book 21 in order to cover it. Which one have you missed?
The 19th arrondissement.
Okay.
So that's, again, it's up where the La Villette, when you go up from Stalingrad, when you go up Canal Saint-Martin and you go up and then Basin La Villette that opens up and you go up north, like northeast, there's the Science Museum, the Geode, and, Gare du Nord. So
right.
The train line shooting up. So around there, you've got the Parc Butte Chameau, which a lot of people like. You've probably been there. It was an old gypsum quarry. It's actually pretty beautiful. A lot of people really like it. And so I'm setting some, of course I'm going to kill someone in the grotto there. I'm going to kill someone at the waterfall because it just.
I thought you were going to do a version of Murder on the Orient Express with a Gare du Nord, but I can see the grotto would be entrancing.
Yeah, my friend I was there in September and she said, and she said, I want to go over there and walk again. So she's like FaceTiming me going through and, of course, part of it's closed for me. Anyway, I have to go back and do it myself. But it's the 19th arrondissement. It's, can't say too much. I haven't finished it yet. But next year we get, we have a follow-up to Kate Reese, 3 Hours in Paris. Uh-huh. And the title, get this, and Reese Bowen came up with this title, Night Flight to Paris.
Very nice.
Isn't that nice? She's great. I just don't know how to. So I'm going to let her do all my titles if they're not the murder.
Why not? She's a good friend. She can be useful. So why are you doing a follow-up to it? Did you just learn so much about it that you felt like the story wasn't over?
Yeah, I felt Kate Reese. I really like Kate Reese. I felt there were a few dangling threads from before. Right. So we're moved up to 1942 and she's been teaching shooting. She's an assassin. She's a shooter. She's a sniper. So she's really good because she grew up on a ranch in Oregon. So she's working with people, in secret homes up in the Scottish Highlands, and she's teaching rifle shooting and so a little bit of, how do you handle this under pressure. And then there is evidently the woman she trained with is, I can't say too much. One of the women she trained with is in trouble in Paris and has asked for her to come. Only she needs her skills in occupied Paris.
It's interesting that there were women. There's a new Kay Quinn book out this month about the famous Russian sniper, which also inspired Stephen Hunter in Sniper's Honor, which is one of my two most favorite Stephen Hunters. 47 Samurai is my, the book of my heart by Stephen. But Sniper's Honor is an amazing book. But there were women, Soviet women, who flew. They're called the Night Witches, and did some remarkable pilot things. But there were also women who were very gifted snipers. And I think that the character that Kate's written about wrote a memoir and some other things. So, it's a fictionalized look at her life. But I remember you said, Kate, she's from the Wyoming or somewhere, right?
Oregon.
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 Okay.
Yeah,
so she was raised in kind of a hunting culture or whatever,
yes.
Where she developed a great eye and was a great shot. And the thing is, to be a sniper, you don't have to have a lot of physical strength. You have to have terrific hand-eye coordination. You have to have great eyesight, patience, all that. But you don't necessarily have to be super strong to be a sniper. So it was, I think, a good role for women, who were in combat to fall into.
Exactly. And I know the character Kate's writing about that new book, which is, I read about that woman a lot, and I sort of based on that, that, and also they say, there's a whole regiment or whatever they are, a platoon or a squad.
Yeah, there's a whole platoon of them. Yeah.
So I said, and we should have used that, and I know that woman came to America, as a guest of Eleanor Roosevelt. And when they asked her what, she said, I had 309 confirmed kills or whatever it was. And they said, but what kind of lipstick do you wear? This is the American press. What is that outfit you're wearing? Well, it's my uniform. And that just says it right there, right? How women were treated, but with these skills. But, that's the great thing during World War II. Women, the men were gone basically in hiding or fighting or doing resistance work. So the women had to carry on, not only with the family and had to do some work to bring in food or money, but they also, they just blend in. They are women. You don't, normally pick out a woman who has a bicycle with her child, on the back and some eggs in the front in the basket, and think that they have guns underneath, which some of them did, So, they have this great way to blend in and just be, the men are thinking, that wouldn't happen. And it did, I hear these stories. It's, why not?
The unifying figure in your books is actually not a person. It's really Paris, isn't it?
Yep.
I love that. I think one of the real joys of crime fiction is that the culture, the landscape, in the best of them there's a rare exception like Reacher, because everywhere he goes is a different one. But most of the time when you think about icons of crime fiction, you associate them with a particular landscape or a particular culture, whether it's Parker in Boston or Paretsky in Chicago or Connolly in Los Angeles or, Tony Hillerman here, whatever. And I love that because it gives you a chance to learn things about a place that you wouldn't necessarily ever come across under other circumstances. Reese is very good at winkling out things like that in various books that she writes. I think she has a very keen sense of place.
And that's what makes it, that's what I love to read. I want to go somewhere, I want to go somewhere on the page. Right. I want to go to that time because it's always probably a different time, a different epoch or era. And I love the Paris, that I, first started visiting, and I want to go back there. So I go back in this little room by writing. I
Right.
don't get to go there personally, but I love those stories. I think there's a new film in Paris or France that came out with Gérard Depardieu as Maigret. How many Maigrets do we
Another
need?
Maigret. Oh, Lord.
But the previews look amazing, really stylistically in that dark cobbled
Yeah.
street. And there's a hulking figure. He's got his pipe, and actually, I think it looks great. Actually, but I love that.
Yeah, he looks like Maigret. There is a fabulous series. If any of you watch MHZ TV, which is my favorite channel because it's all international mystery, and much of it is set in France. There is a series called Murder In, and then it's ... and it's, I think there are 10 seasons of it now, and it takes you to all different places in France, and the photography is fabulous. Drones have made all the difference, for that kind of photography. But every episode is, it's different characters. There are a few repeating characters, but there's no real through line. It's about a particular place. So you're in Brittany, and then you're in Calais, and then you're down in, Toulouse, or you're whatever. And it's the best way to explore France. It actually is like a travel series with interesting stories. And some of the plots are better than others, that's just the way of it. But I have loved it. And my husband and I have watched it. And, we feel like we have spent so much time in France as a result, of doing. They run, I think, an hour and a half. So it's, a little bit longer. And they're not a serial. So you can just watch one, and then you can, go back and pick up another. But I can't recommend it enough for anybody who is missing traveling in France. There's also a wonderful series by M.L. Longworth, which is set down in the Provence area.
Aix-en-Provence, yeah.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful series to read. And then, of course, there's Martin Walker and the Périgord and the Dordogne with Bruno, which is spectacular. We'll be talking to Martin we'll be launching his collection of stories with recipes on March 15th. And he has sent us a recipe to include that's not in the book, which is wonderful. So, let's see, Mark Pryor has a World War II Paris book coming up. There's so much that is being written about, different parts of France, and so much. The French have done brilliantly with television during the pandemic. I mean, most of us know Call My Agent, and that's Paris, of course, and that's wonderful. But there are so many other parts of France that there's a series set in Le Havre, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a glamorous place at all. And hilariously, it's written by an English author, but it's filmed in France, and the characters are French. There's The Art of the Crime, which involves...
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
I love Art of the Crime. Yep. And then there was kind of a fabulous Agatha Christie riff that went on for several seasons, had one of the best finales ever. And then, having nothing to do with crime, there's a 2-year series called Just Chef. And the whole thing is this incredible melodrama that takes place in a great French restaurant. And what goes on in the kitchen is just like war. And, so if you're interested,
murder.
Oh, it's terrific. So let's call Patrick up and see if we have questions or comments or whatever it is from people who by now are wishing they were in France.
Yeah, let's see here. Okay, well, first of all, Gail Yates would like to know, she says, is Cara's appearance in Tucson at the book festival live or virtual?
We believe it's live. Because unless things change, I'm going on an airplane. Yeah, we think it's live.
Okay, great.
So yeah, next weekend. No, 2 weeks.
It's 2 weeks. Yeah.
Weeks.
Yeah. I mean, that'll be my third in-person event in 2 years.
Beautiful.
Wow. Let's see here. Oh, please tell us again the name of the series you've been watching that's set in France.
It's called Murder In, and then it's an ellipses because each murder in takes place in a different city. So, and the TV is called M as in Mary, H as in Harry, Z as in zebra. And I'm not sure that you can't get to it through Netflix or Hulu anymore. I mean, I can't keep up with all the streaming services, but
It's a channel. Yeah. It's a
yeah,
channel.
and I mean, it has Swiss and German and Austrian. I mean, there are other countries, but the French television has really been, and there's some great Nordic stuff too. There's some wonderful Scandinavian ones on it. Finland, there's a new one set in Sweden called Sandham Murders, all kinds of great things. But Murder in ... is the best one to watch.
All right. Let's see. Oh, okay. Michelle says, hello, Cara. It's Michelle, one of your students from France last semester.
Oh,
So excited for you. Congratulations.
thank you. Hi, Michelle. Yeah, I did a writing workshop in Bordeaux with a friend who's a nonfiction writer. I did the fiction, of course, it was all mystery, right? And the nonfiction. And we held classes in a chateau. You know, it was so hard, but yes, can you imagine? It was great. So hi, Michelle. I hope you're still writing.
Well, she also asks, do you think you might write a murder mystery in the Bordeaux Saint-Emilion area one day?
I'm thinking about it. In this book, in Murder in the Porte de Versailles, actually, Aimee at Chloe's birthday party, they're drinking Veuve Clicquot and wine from Saint-Emilion. So I sort of put that in there. Yeah, it was wonderful. It's a whole part of France I have never seen, the Bordeaux region and Saint-Emilion, and I had never been there, and it opened my eyes. It was beautiful. You know, we were in the river, and yeah, right. And it's so close to Dordogne, so close to Martin Walker. It's like a 40 minutes you can drive there. So it's amazing.
And Michelle says it was an amazing workshop. I loved it, and she's definitely still writing. So that's
Good.
Karen Oden, our good friend, she says, I love the idea that assumptions that men have can be worked to a woman's advantage in true history and fiction.
I think women did it during the war all the time. And I think Aimee knows that as well. I mean, as a woman, you use what you have. I don't mean that in a sexist way. It just means that you navigate the world as it is and change what you can. And of course, if you're on a job, you've got to work with the situation. So, multitasking.
You've addressed this already a little bit, but Gail wants to know what happens once you finish the arrondissements.
What happens when I finish? Well, each arrondissement has 4 quartiers. So in theory, there's 80 quartiers, right? I don't think I'll do that. But I mean, there could be murder in Bordeaux. There could be murder in Marseille, you know? I've been to Marseille and I think it's very ripe. A murder up in Brittany, I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot that can happen. But I've been doing this, you know, during the pandemic of doing an Aimee book, which is like coming home and into her world, and then, you know, going to World War II. So it's kind of an interesting, you know, I kind of go between these these eras. And I like that. I like that a lot, you know.
Let's see here. Looks like that's just about it for the actual questions.
Okay, I'm going to give a plug to 4 books by Jean-Luc Bandelec, which are set in Brittany, and they are wonderful. Hilariously, he turns out to be German, who summers in Brittany, and his real name is not Bandelec, but the first 4 especially are absolutely wonderful if you want to spend time in Brittany. Murder in Brittany is the first one. The Fleur de Sel murders, I think, might be the 4th one. The translator changed, and so they read differently after that. But I think those first 4 are absolutely fabulous. And there's so much about Brittany. Boy, that is a mystical, magical. It's Celtic, you know.
Celtic,
it's
yes.
in Isolde country. It's
and the Menhirs, you know, those Menhirs and very much
right.
so. I love that. Fleur de Sel murders. I love That's a great title.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's lots of, you can really travel around France in books and enjoy yourself and eat. Martin Walker's books, for example, are full of food. Oh, Lord, Bruno cooks, and you just want to be right there while he's plucking things out of his garden and doing all that. And you can do that in a rural setting that, in Paris, she has to go to the market, right? Because she's not really growing stuff out in the back. But,
And she doesn't really cook. She thinks, bistros are there. That's why they were invented. She doesn't need to cook. If there's a bistro or a cafe.
You bet. She's a city girl. Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you ever, Cara, have you ever read those books by Jean-Claude Izzo that are set in Marseille? The Marseille, was it a trilogy?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Really interesting books.
Really. Oh, he got that flavor of Marseille, the sun and yeah, I think he's passed away. I think he died very young. But
he did. Yeah, sadly.
So I liked the one with the hitman. What's the one? It was the prone gunman, Manchette.
Oh, Manchette. Yeah, Jean-Patrick Manchette.
I think he died. Oh, I love those too. I think he was kind of like a hitman or something, and he was.
Yeah. So the French have a real love and history of writing noir fiction. I mean, they like noir and hard boiled. Our friend James Salas sells really well in France, for example, because they also like a certain existential quality also to their books.
Yeah, and they love polar. It was interesting for a while at the train stations. They would have, with a partnership with the French rail system, they'd have like these pocketbook, small polar, crime novels, but thin ones, and you just pick it up like you're going to Lyon for the day, or whatever. You take a Lyon one, and I thought, well, that's brilliant, right? Or a story, or a novelette, or a novella. And I thought, wow, that's just fantastic, that you would take something, where you're going or the region, and I never knew, when I went to Paris, I was like, Paris is Paris, but it's not. It's composed of what was, it started at Notre Dame and just spiraled out like a snail with these villages incorporating and building walls, knocking them down. So each village, like the country, each province has a different flavor, and like you were saying before, it was 1860. Belleville, Montmartre, all were villages. They used to go there and drink because there was no taxes. It wasn't part of Paris until they incorporated it. Same with the 15th arrondissement, the Vaugirard that Aimee drives on. It goes through, it's the longest street in Paris. It goes right to Versailles. But that was the village of Grenelle and Vaugirard, with these villages, and I just thought, and I'm always looking for that trace, that flavor of what it was like, because someone's grandmother used to be, working in the they used to have laundry. People would do laundry on the Seine, a long time ago. They had
right, yeah,
and because they didn't have laundromats, and people used to have public baths because they lived in these small apartments and they didn't have water. And they didn't have bathrooms, and so they have to go to the, public bath. And I think that's fascinating, which I think probably in all cities, big cities you did, poor people didn't have, they lived in rooms, or pensions. So there's those traces, which are amazing.
Absolutely.
So have you ever set a scene in the catacombs, Cara?
Yes, there's a flashback. Morbier, I can't remember which book, I'm sorry, but I remember Morbier is with Aimee, or he's talking to Aimee about, or they're in the catacombs, and so I remember that. Oh, and in the next book they go in the catacombs when they're escaping occupied Paris. But anyway, yeah,
we went down there when I was in Paris, and it was absolutely fascinating. Crazy, strange history.
Yeah, and you have to climb down and you have to climb up. Yeah.
Well, Paris is built on limestone, and there were quarries, and over time the accumulation rises, but the underneath stuff is still there, and you just tunnel further down to it.
Right.
Yeah, they call it a gruyere. You know, Paris is a gruyere, right? Just built on these holes of limestone and gypsum. And my
Yeah.
friend lived in Montmartre. She moved her apartment, and I said to her, "Wow, your building is so old." You know, she said, "My building is safe. What do you mean?" I said, "No, I'm, just because she was on a hill." And she goes, "See?" And she showed me like some deeds, 1860. It was approved for stability. I'm like, okay, that was proof. And I thought, we're on top of those limestone, with all these holes, and that's why they can't build up there, I guess. But that was kind of de rigueur for her. Oh, it's fine, it's okay. I'm like, yeah, 1860, okay, whatever.
Well, if you go down to the Dordogne, which was that big hangout of Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon man, part of it was because with all the limestone, there were all these caves and overhangs, and people could live there, just like the Anasazi up here in our own northern Arizona, Utah, New Mexico region, where there were overhangs, shelter, people could live and so forth. But France has a fascinating geography. I really have loved exploring that. Well, Cara, it's been lovely to spend time with you. I'm glad we got to do your soft launch. The actual official date is March 15th, the Ides of March. So we're avoiding that superstitious date. Cara will sign our books. She ought to be getting them any day now. And so they ought to be back here next week for sure, if not the end of this week. And they will have a very cool map in them that she's putting inside. So we recommend that you order one now before we run out. And we will hope to see Cara live in person before too long. If you go to Tucson, apparently you'll get to see her at all, but that won't help you if you're not living here in the Metro Phoenix or Tucson area. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us. Bonsoir, chérie.
Merci, Barbara. Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. Say hi to everyone. Thank you so much. Au revoir.
Au revoir.